This is Conscious Leaders, and today I'm joined by Paul Holbrook. Paul is the CEO and founder of Diary Detox. So he spent years in the city and ultimately left because he was unhappy. He tells us about his journey and how he actually has now moved from doing something he was really not passionate about in order to set up a business that is all around helping others lead. It starts with this problem of time, something that we all think we don't have enough of. And he's created this amazing methodology, think color coding. And it's a way that businesses can see exactly where their people are doing what, but more than the business, it's really self-awareness. So Paul gives us insight into his background, how he got to where he is now. He explains Diary Detox and Time to Lead, which is a leadership program that they've created. He talks about the different color coding systems within Diary Detox, one of which is living. And I think this is so important, something that we all really need to be mindful of and make sure that it's included in our day-to-day life, because if we're not doing the things that fill us up, then it can lead to burnout. I know it personally, because that's what happened to me. What else do we talk about? So much. We talk about Paul gives us these really simple tips so that you can start curating your calendar, planning your diary in a much better way. And he also shares his non-negotiables. It's a really fun conversation. And he has some wonderful stories and anecdotes. So without further ado, let's start the conversation. Hi, Paul. Nice to have you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So let's start with a bit about you. You didn't start as a founder. Can you give us a little bit of your journey and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah. So no, I didn't start as a founder. I kind of always wanted to be a founder, but I just had no idea what it was I wanted to found, which I think was quite bizarre. But then the kind of moment presented itself. I spent 20 years in the city of London. I wasn't a banker. I was actually a technologist. My degree was in mathematics originally. I got a job with a bank, writing computer programs. But then after about 2 years, realized I was more interested in how people worked than I was in how computers worked. And that naturally led me up the management track to the point 20 years later when I was running a division of 350 people, head of change for an investment bank in London. But there'd always been a niggling doubt for me, probably more of an annoyance, that as I looked around, I just didn't feel that the quality of managers or leaders in organizations was very good. And I saw being a manager very differently, not to everybody, but to a lot of the people that I saw. And I saw that being a manager was more about making it as simple as possible for other people to do their job. For me, that it really was as simple as that, but I just didn't see it anywhere. And those 20 years built that frustration for me until about 6 years ago, my wife turned around and said, "You're miserable doing what you're doing. We're doing okay. I've got a good job. So why don't I look after us for a while and you go start a business and try and change the world?" And so I get a bit emotional when I say this. And so that's what I did. And to start with, I thought it was about coaching. I thought I was going to become a leadership coach, and I trained as one. But then as I started to market myself out to those managers, those leaders that I thought needed it, they would all say, "It sounds really interesting, but I just haven't got any time." And that really puzzled me. I thought, well, what is it that's filling your time so much that you don't have time to lead yourself, invest in yourself and your own abilities? And it reminded me of something that I'd done probably about 6 or 7 years beforehand when I was running this big division. And it was about showing a manager that was working for me how little of their time was actually spent doing the things I needed them to do, and how they'd convinced themselves all the stuff they were doing was stuff they didn't need to do. And so after about 3 months of struggling to get clients to find the time, I kind of realized that actually maybe this is my thing. That's the thing I need to found, which is giving leaders more time, and initially just to give them more time to lead themselves. And that was the genesis of the Diary Detox. That was my founding story.
Such a good story. And, bravo for your wife.
Oh, I know.
being so, recognizing where you were at and that there needed to be a change for your personal well-being and for your relationship, I would assume.
For marriage, no, it wasn't that bad.
I would love to just dig into a little bit about that sort of feeling, because I also went through sort of a moment where I was on the exhaustion funnel heading towards burnout. And I know how it felt to me, but it's sometimes really useful for other people to hear about others' experience about burnout, or about, what that negativity and unhappiness felt like in your body.
Yeah. It was horrible. I mean, for me, I didn't realize it afterwards, but I think I'm not predisposed to clinical depression or anything, but it was a form of depression in hindsight. I mean, I was getting on the train in the morning, and the only thing that I could really bear to do, I couldn't bear to sit there and think about what was about to happen at work. And so every morning I'd get on the train, I'd find my favorite piece of music, I would just turn it on and I would close my eyes and try and sleep, because it was the only way I could avoid thinking about anything. I'd get to work and I would count the hours until I could leave. And I was miserable. I just didn't enjoy, there was no kind of enjoyment in my work. My family life and my personal life was great. And thank goodness it was, because it would have been a dismal existence if that had also been bad. But I just really wasn't happy. And there have been a couple of moments where my wife and I had gone out for lunch. She'd come into London some days and I would just be in tears at the table, and it was clear I wasn't happy. And I think that's probably what led her to say, why don't I look after us for a while and you go and do something that you really care about? And for me, it was, we just shouldn't have a workplace that feels like this. So yeah, it felt horrible. And thank goodness that like I say, my personal life was in a good place, because I dread to think where I'd have been if otherwise. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you've been able to make the change and you've created something really amazing. So I'd love you to explain Diary Detox. It's more than an app, right?
God. Yeah. So, I mean, like I say, Diary Detox is a method. At its heart, it's a method, and it's a method focused on leadership, funnily enough. I mean, it's interesting because the name, I wanted it to be quite alliterative. And so the name, because it was talking about time, and it was about removing a lot of stuff that we have in our diaries that we don't need. And for an American audience, that would be calendar. I have received feedback that a diary is this thing that has a lock on it that you put your secret thoughts in.
Yeah, it's your secret journal.
Exactly.
Writing away, you don't want anyone to say no. Because I lived in the UK for a very long time, diary, calendar, we'll make sure in the notes that it's included, that they equal the same thing.
Yeah, I have had moments where I thought, should we call it a calendar cleanse? I thought it doesn't have quite the same ring to it. So it's a method. And like I say, it was really about giving managers a way to see what's really going on in their days. I think a lot of leadership development courses, they spend a lot of time telling new managers or leaders what they should be doing. The big problem is that when they hear that, they go, yeah, but I've already got all this other stuff. And I think that's the real gap in that kind of space for me, is that they focus on telling managers what to do rather than telling them what they don't need to do. And that was the difference for Diary Detox. It was about showing people that actually that stuff that you spend probably 80% of your time doing is not stuff you should be doing. And here's some strategies to stop doing it. And I know that as soon as you remove all that stuff, you will naturally fill it with the stuff that you do need to do. So it started off as a method. One of the key kind of pillars of it is we use color, all right? Because when somebody tells me what they're doing and what's going on, I can hear it and I can go, I think I know what's going on there. But the real key is self-realization. It's getting somebody to realize for themselves that what they're doing probably isn't the right thing. And I found a way of using color to do that. Some people color their calendars and their diaries. And
it's actually something, that color coding is something that I've only recently started doing, but it does really help to identify different categories. I think my color coding is very different from your methodology. So it'd be great to hear the color coding behind Diary Detox.
Yeah, sure. So I'll put a bit of context around it. So I once did a Diary Detox with a she was a consultant in a business, and she said, oh, well, I already color code my diary. And I go, oh, wow, okay, tell me about your color coding. I'm a bit of a color coding geek. And so they said, well, all of my client meetings, for example, are yellow. And I went, okay, so why do you use yellow for your client meetings? And she said, well, because yellow reminds me of gold, gold reminds me of money, money, clients. And I went, wow, okay, that's interesting. And I said, just out of interest, do all of your client meetings always result in the money you expect? And she said, no. I said, okay, so the ones that don't result in money, what color are those? And she said, yellow. And I went, but they don't result in the money. She said, yeah, I suppose so. And that's the fundamental difference, right? For me, most people, when they color their calendar, they color what they do. What Diary Detox does is it colors the value you get out of what you do, okay? So, for example, we use 5 colors. So everything that you do in work or life can be put into one of 5 colors. Which one do we start with? Let's start with probably the most common one. So you've got what I call doing, and doing is red stuff, okay? Now, red is productivity, okay? That's usually if you're delivering a service, if you're earning money, if you're sending out invoices, you're doing admin. Email is usually red. This is the stuff that generally most of us kind of feel like we have to do, all right? So that's the stuff that earns you money, either directly or indirectly. Then you've got amber stuff, and amber stuff is what I call managing. And managing is about checking to make sure that things are okay, checking in with clients to make sure the service you're delivering is okay and things like that, but also checking in with your people to find out if they're okay. But it's also directing, which is giving people instruction, telling people what to do. Then there's green stuff, and I'm wearing green, and you're going to notice that I usually wear the color of the thing that I'm doing in this meeting. So right now I am doing green stuff, and green is about leading. And leading at its very simplest is about making things or people better, including yourself, all right? And it's broken down to 3 different things. It's thinking about how you make things better, talking about how you're going to make things better, which is what we're doing now, and then there's actually making them better, improving them. And the interesting thing is that that stuff is what a lot of managers should be doing, but they're not. Okay, but that's the stuff that makes your service better. It's the stuff that makes your people better. It's the stuff that makes you better, gets you promotion, gets you the bonus, gets you all these things. And we do so little of this stuff because it includes learning as well. So that's those 3 things. Those were the original 3 colors. Then there was another one that came in, which we call floating. Now, floating is gray, all right? And floating is either not adding any value or not being sure what value you're adding. And what's really fascinating is the number of conversations I can have with somebody where they'll say, oh yeah, that meeting with my boss is definitely green. It's definitely worth doing. And then I just ask them one really simple question that tells me it's floating. And all I say is, if that meeting with your boss was cancelled, what would you lose? And they often say, nothing. That's great. That's a floating meeting. But being invited to a meeting with no agenda, being invited without knowing why you're going to a meeting, that's also gray as well. It's a gray area, right? A lot of our time is spent on that stuff without us realizing it. But then lastly, definitely not least, there's living. And living is blue. And that is about looking after our physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional well-being. Okay, that's taking time off when you need it, preventatively as well as sometimes reactively when you're ill, spending time with your family, taking breaks, having lunch, going and doing exercise, going for a walk, walking the dogs, spending time with the people that you really love. As soon as you put those 5 colors onto someone's calendar or diary, it's really interesting the insight you get, because everybody kind of says what they believe, but what you say isn't what you believe. What you do is what you believe. And as soon as you put those colors onto someone's calendar, I can see what you believe very, very quickly. And the whole point of the Diary Detox course is to get people to see that for themselves as well. It's about becoming consciously incompetent, knowing what we're not doing well at.
Yeah. And as you said in the beginning, just about self-awareness, which
it's
many of us don't have.
No. And, people will say, the best way to solve a problem is by first admitting you have one. To admit that, you need to realize it. And I had a conversation with the client this morning, who was just signed up for their company, and they said, I think our managers know what they need to do, they just don't realize that they're not doing it yet. And it's like, well, this is perfect because that's what it's there for. So yeah, so it's a method. I then wrote a book about it because I wanted to start working with bigger companies and I didn't want to leave small business owners or the individuals behind. So I thought, well, if I write a book, they can read the book and they can get it. That then resulted in me creating the app to support the journey. And then most recently, that's really come all the way full circle round to the original story, which was about creating a leadership development program that is fundamentally based on the principles of Diary Detox, but in itself is about selecting the right managers and creating managers who love people, which I think is a word that we just do not use enough in business.
No, and I like that idea of, you know, the right managers are doing the right things. But there is this thing in the business world where people get promoted into managerial positions because that's sort of the next step within that department, but they're not necessarily meant to be a manager. They're not meant to manage other people, inspire other people. They're great at what they do. They perform amazingly, but managerial skills, not really. And it doesn't really turn them on, doesn't light them up. How does Diary Detox help companies with this sort of problem?
Well, Diary Detox itself on its own doesn't help people with that problem. That's the Time to Lead program. But part of going through that program is learning the Diary Detox method that then helps them go on the journey. But the key for me, and it's an interesting one, right? I mean, I've worked with companies to deliver Diary Detox, and what's really fascinating is it's usually very difficult to bring experienced managers on that journey. It's not impossible. And when they get that kind of realization, they kind of go, oh, wow, how do I change that? Okay, then you're halfway there. But by far and away and without a shadow of doubt, the best way to avoid to stop the problem is to avoid it in the first place. You know, stop promoting those people to start with. And it's fascinating. You'll see stats from Harvard Business Review that say that, you know, managers will generally on average work for 9 years before they're finally taught how to be one. And it's like, wow, that's just shocking. And I think the key for me is about filling a gap. I once went on a management development course and I spoke to the most senior person at that course. It was a multi-million-pound program that was run for a big bank I used to work for. And I said to them on the break, I said, what do you think of this course? And I'll be honest, I thought the course was really good, but I'm a true believer. But I said to them, what do you think? And they said, well, it's all right. I mean, it's nothing I haven't seen before. And it's like, and there's the first red flag, right? It's nothing we haven't seen before. We all know what good leadership looks like, but so many managers just aren't doing it. It was what he said next, which was the real light bulb moment and probably led me to one of the reasons that led me to leave my career and start my business. They said, the thing is, how am I going to find time to do all this new stuff when I've already got all this other stuff on my plate? And it was like, I don't think you realize what you've just said. It's the wrong way around. It's, how am I going to find time to do all this stuff I used to do when I've now got all this amazing stuff to do? And the key for me is that I think we put too many people in management and we put too many people on leadership development courses without first saying, do you want to be a manager? You know, are you fundamentally predisposed to loving people? Because that's the key, all right? And so the first module of Time to Lead is called Time to Decide. And what that's about is, you know, we all know about these HR meetings where everybody comes together and says, who are our high potentials? Who are the best people at doing this job? And the people we want to promote next. And what will normally happen is they'll wait for a position and then they'll say, do you want to be a manager? And unfortunately, the only incentivization they have is it's more money and a better title. And who's not going to want to do that, right? But that isn't what we should be using to incentivize managers to become managers, not money and a title, because everybody will say yes. For me, Time to Decide was about, well, why don't we basically expose those people to a situation where they get to explore what becoming a manager will really mean? Yeah, taking your people's failures as your own, investing in people, their fun, investing in their development, in their well-being, doing your best for, looking out for opportunities for them, everything. And at the end of that, having heard all that and how difficult it can be and challenging, do you want to be a manager still? And that's what they do. At the end of that first module, they walk out with their name badge. I've got a name badge here that I used in the recent one. And they walk out, and as they walk out, they get to put that name badge into one of two boxes. Do you want to be a manager now? Yes or no? And At the most recent one I ran, 12% of the people that came said, I don't want to be a manager. 12%. And what's fascinating is that without that course, all of those 12% of people would have been a manager, but they wouldn't have wanted to be a manager. And this is where we're trying to create a business case for human resources and chief people officers to say, expose the reality of how many of your people really don't want to be a manager, and find a different path for those people. Because as soon as you make them a manager, they'll make themselves and the people around them miserable. And that is not what people who love people do.
No, so right. And it's so funny how, you know, obviously the people in the senior positions are the ones that are high achievers and they want to continue to, so they just assume that everyone else must want to be on that path. Yeah, when absolutely. Clearly that's not the case. And so talking to your people about their development is hugely important.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely a green behavior, right?
Right, right. I want to talk a little bit more about leadership and really understand what's your definition of good leadership.
Okay, so language is a big thing for me, and I'm gonna kind of redefine your question a little bit. All right, and I'm not doing it to avoid the conversation, but I think too often we've heard these questions asked. You know, what is good leadership? And the thing is, I think good leadership itself is anything that gets people to follow you. All right. But, and you know, a bit of a trigger alert here. If you use that as an example, then some would say that Adolf Hitler was a good leader because he got people to follow him, right? But that's really not what I'm talking about. I don't talk about what leadership is. I talk about what leading is. And for me, leading is an action, it's an activity, and it's made up of three things. And the way I always do this with people is I say, look, if you want to think about what leading is, think of a person who you think is a great leader for you right now. And it could be anybody, right? And once somebody has thought of that, we say, okay, so what is it about them that makes them a good leader? And for me, leading is about making things or people better. It is that simple. Okay. And if you are likely to turn around to somebody and say, yeah, I'm a great leader, then I will usually say, so what was the last thing that you improved? And if they can't tell me, it's probably because they haven't been a leader, right? And so I say, well, look, being a leader is about improving things. And so what do we need to do to improve things? We need to think about what we're going to improve and why. First thing. So that's thinking. That's the first green behavior. Once you've thought about something to improve, and this is a massively missed out step in a lot of people that try to implement change, is we talk about what it is we want to improve with the people who are going to be affected by it to get their opinion, because it might be that we're wrong. You know, sometimes senior leaders are so far removed from the detail that they'll say, I've got this great idea about this system that we can implement for all of our people that's going to make their life better. And they go and implement it. But when you ask their people, they go, that's not going to make my life better. What would make my life better is if somebody actually listened to me for a second. It's really, really simple stuff a lot of the time. So thinking about how to improve things, talking about how to improve things, and that might also result in people sharing their ideas with you about how to make things better. And at that point, you've just got thoughts and words. So the last step is actually doing it, making it better, which is what we call improving. But that could be improving yourself through learning. It could be improving others through teaching, coaching, mentoring, or it could be improving your business, your processes, your department, all the things it does and how it does them. Those are the three things that are what I call leading. And if you're not doing those things, then you're probably managing at best. But in my experience, you're probably not even doing that. A lot of managers get caught on the red stuff. They do their people's job for them because it's just simpler if I do it, or it's just easier if I do it, or they won't do it the way that I would do it.
And takes less time.
Absolutely. Well, in the short term, it might take less
exactly.
time, but in the long term, it's really expensive. So that's what leading is for me.
And the blue color, which I love the story behind it because it wasn't part of the original color coding. So if you could just explain how it came about, why it came about.
Yeah. So like I said, originally it was only three colors. The gray color didn't come about until later. And that's important because if you think about, let's say, well, I'll give you the real example. So it was my and my wife's wedding anniversary, and we were going to go away for an afternoon to a spa to have massages and just chill. And it was in the middle of what would normally be a working day. And what's really interesting is that because I only had the 4 colors, green, amber, red, and gray, with only those 4 to choose from, the only color that it naturally fit into was gray.
Gray.
Yeah, it wasn't adding any work value. And it was at that moment that I had a bit of a discomfort. I kind of went, well, hang on a minute. The whole point of gray is it's stuff that you should remove, but I don't want to remove that. So what's going on there? And then eventually I just kind of thought, oh, I'll deal with it another time. And my default color in my diary at that point was blue. It was like the uncolored item was blue. And I just put it in there. I said, Paul and Emma going to spa, blue. It was there for half a day in my diary, and that was it. And I went off and I did what I did. But this was the kind of the point, is that because I blocked that time out and there was nothing else in there, I didn't feel like I had to work. It was almost like I'd given myself permission not to work. And it's only when I then came back and thought, I didn't feel guilty about taking that time off. So what's happened there? And I realized I was missing a color. And that color is about living. It's about, looking after yourself. And when I came to color it, my favorite color is blue, and the uncolored items in my candle were blue. So it's like, oh, I'll just use blue. And so living became blue by accident, and living became living because, it felt like I'd given myself permission to live. And I know that if I'd have left that space empty, I would have probably been considering, there's probably something I should be doing now, but I hadn't named it. But by naming it and accepting that that's something I really want to do, I think it's giving me more, I'm actually intrinsically giving myself permission to do it. So that's where blue came from. And it's become massively important, especially through the pandemic as well, because I think a lot of people found that they ended up doing more red stuff because they had more time. They weren't traveling anywhere. There was no commute, which was a big argument before the pandemic happened. People saying, well, my problem with time is because I have too much commuting. You remove the commute, and what happened? They just worked more and got worse.
Yeah, that's exactly what we saw with our clients. And it started, the calls would get earlier, Zoom from 1 minute back to back to back to back. And there was no time in between to do anything, to have any of those reset moments, which I would assume would go into blue.
Absolutely. I mean, how many times did you go into a meeting and somebody say, can I just go to the toilet?
Yes, I know exactly.
You go,
which I guess really is living, because you need to do that to live.
It's looking after your physical well-being, believe me.
Yeah.
And that was the key for me, right? It was like, wow. So interestingly, when we used to commute, or when we were in an office like I am now, we would get interrupted, and people would call them the water cooler moments, or they call them interruptions. And what it made me realize was that, that beforehand, there were probably a lot more blue interruptions than you probably needed. But the pandemic showed us that we'd gone to a point where there were none. And it's like, there's a middle ground, there's a healthy middle ground. And so, and I always profess that if you want your people to improve their well-being and improve your workplace culture, and it's really uncomfortable for some managers to hear this to start with, I advise that people plan their blue time in before they plan any of their work time. Because what that does is it actually shrinks down the amount of time they have to work, which actually makes you more focused and actually means you get more done in less time. Not in a bad way, but it means that you're effectively working in the gaps between life instead of living in the gaps between work, which is what we always did before. And look where that got us.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the exhaustion funnel, which is sort of how burnout is categorized. And it's that full life at the top and just that narrow little point at the bottom. And as it goes down, you just strip away all the things that actually fill you up and that you enjoy until it's just one thing, usually work, and work ends up not being as fulfilling because you don't have those other things. What have you found? You mentioned the word healthy. Have you found that there's a healthy ratio for leading strongly, for strong leaders? I'm trying to use your terminology of leading. So like good leadership, a good balance for leading well is divided in a certain way by colors.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's actually aspirational. So I usually, if a company, I mean, that client I was talking to this morning, the first journey we're going to go on is we're going to do a discovery. And what we do is we ask everybody in the organization how much of their time is spent on each of the colors. We do it in a clever way so they can't game the system. But as well as asking that question, what we also ask is, how do you think you should be spending your time? Because I think it goes a long way to talking to mindset. You know, are people spending a lot of their time red because they think they should, or are they doing it because circumstances make them do that? And that's a really important question to answer. And one of the ways in which we do that is, depending on the level you are within an organization, you would normally, and I use the word really lightly, right, normally expect to see a different percentage of each of the colors. So at the very lowest end of the organization, and what we mean by low is most junior, is that the majority of people's time should be spent hands-on doing, right? That's their job. You're a doer, that you have been hired to do that. So you usually have quite a high proportion of the red stuff at that level, some elements of the amber, which is self-management, you know, checking up on yourself, checking in with your clients or your peers. Is everything that I'm doing okay? Is this working? Can I do anything else to help, etc.? And there's also some element of leading, okay? Because leading isn't just about leading other people, it's also about leading yourself. And that could be self-learning. That could be getting coached or getting mentored or something like that, okay? So lots of red, bit of amber, bit less of green. At the very other end of the spectrum, when you get to being the CEO of a business, it is actually the inverse. 70% of your time should be spent on the green stuff. And that's thinking about where your organization is, where it needs to go, why you want to get there, what's standing in your way, and what could you do to change that, etc. Then there'll be a smaller amount of the amber stuff, just making sure that that vision is being realized. And a very, very small proportion, about 10% of their time should be red. And that might be on emails or just stuff that you sometimes have to get involved with as a senior person in the organization. So they're opposite ends of the spectrum. And then at levels in between, those colors are kind of graduated. So you become more green the more senior you are, and you become less red the more senior you are. So yeah, there's definitely a good mix. But the important thing is it's, like I said at the beginning, it's aspirational. All right. And it's also situational. So when you are a new manager, let's say you've just taken on a new job as a CEO of a new company. Interestingly, although the end point would be that you'd be like big green, small yellow, smaller red, to start with, a lot of your time would probably be amber. It would be the yellow color, because that's about you just taking a look to see how things are. Is everything working as it should be? Is everybody okay? And that's monitoring. It's checking to see that everything's okay. You can't possibly have an end vision unless you know where you are right now. So you might start off very yellow, but the end point is that you become very green. So it changes over time.
And what about the blue?
Well, the blue. So what I always say with blue is that everybody should aim to, it's difficult, right? Because you could turn around and say to everybody that everybody should work no longer than 8 hours a day. And you know what? You should work whatever you think you need to work in order to get your job done. Yeah. But from the other point of view, you should have however much living in your life you think you need to be at your best. So in terms of that, what I would normally say to somebody is, look, we've kind of got this this situation, I suppose, where we say we work about 7.5 to 8 hours a day. And I say that you can do everything you need to do in 7.5 to 8 hours a day. Richard Branson does it. Warren Buffett does it. You can do it. Believe me. It just requires you to choose to do it. And just by planning in all of your blue stuff, you are kind of creating that protected boundary. And you can still choose to work during your blue time. But what I really want is I want people to consciously give up that blue time. So that if you say, I'm going to work here, I want you to go, but I'm acknowledging that I'm going to take less blue time. And I think as soon as people do that, I think you get rid of this deferred accountability. Yeah. Well, I can't take any time for myself because I just can't. It's like, well, you can. You had it and you gave it away. And that's your choice. You could do that. But don't pretend it's somebody making you do it. You're choosing to do that. And you can then have some really interesting conversations about why you've chosen to do that and what's really going on in your head. But yeah, I mean, I aim to work no more than 35 hours a week. And often the app actually asks you how many hours you've worked on certain things, you put it in, and very rarely do I work over that. I usually work around about 29 to 32 hours, not the 35 that I ever intend to work.
And you get what you need done, and it helps you prioritize.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because I think as soon as you block out your blue time and you say, well, all I've got left for work is this. And one of the biggest factors, when we do a discovery with a company and people say, where's most of your gray time going? It's usually going on meetings, is what people are saying. All right. And as soon as you block out your blue time and you think, wow, I actually haven't got a huge amount of time to do work in the day, really, especially when you put your lunch hour in and your breaks, it's actually a small amount to do. And what's really fascinating is that when people see that, they kind of go, well, I don't think I've got time for that meeting. It's like, good.
And also, we come from such a meeting culture where meetings are there for sometimes meeting sake, and there's no real purpose, and the agenda isn't clear. I think you said that in the beginning. Yeah. And actually, the people that are there are just this long list of people, rather than being really, really mindful about the purpose of the meeting, who should be there, and what each person's responsibility is in that meeting.
Yeah, and I think the colors can really play a part in that, right? I mean, if you think about being invited to a meeting by your boss and you thinking that meeting's a waste of time.
Yes. Oh, in that sense. Okay.
Now, what do you say to your boss in that situation? Hey, I don't think I should come because it's a waste of my time. I mean, that's what I call a career limiting move, right? So what I've done, and this is what I've had a CEO that's done a diary detox. They've asked me to run it with their senior leadership team. And then as I'm talking through the colors, the CEO's not there, but as I'm talking through the colors, I realize I've lost somebody in the room. Yeah, their heads started to go off and they're thinking about something. I say, hey, what's going on there? And they just turn around to all their colleagues and they said, does anybody think the reason we haven't done that thing that John's asked us to do is because it's floating? And they all went, yeah. And all they're saying there is, we don't know what value it's adding. And you know what? It is your job to not do something if you don't know what value it adds, because you could potentially be wasting time and money. And your boss doesn't want you to waste time and money, believe me. And I turned around to them, I said, well, look, your boss has given you a stick to beat him with here, right? So he knows what floating is. Why don't you use this as part of the conversation? Little did I realize they were going to do it at the end of the meeting when he walked in front of me. But it was fascinating because they said, we've got a bit of a bones pick with you. That thing you've been pestering us for that we haven't done, we've just realized it's because we think it's floating. And not at any moment did he say, what do you mean it's a waste of time? All he said was, why do you think it's floating? And I watched a conversation unfold where it became clear that even though he thought he told them what this was for, they hadn't heard it. And it turned out that at the end of that conversation, they said, so it's doing then, it's red. And he went, yeah. And they went, okay, then we'll do it. And it was that simple. And I am sure that if at the end of that, the realization had been, well, actually, I don't even know why I did want to do that. I know that CEO would have cancelled the meeting, which ultimately gives everybody the outcome they want. Either go to a meeting that you know the value of, or don't go to a meeting that's a waste of time. Either's good. But there was one other real fascinating thing, which is sometimes when I do a discovery and I tell senior people that it's usually between 18 and 28% of what they say, their people say, is gray in their weeks. That's a lot of time, right? That's about a day a week, if not more.
And the goal with gray is really to get rid of it or to help clarify that it should go into something else.
It's to turn it into another color. If you can't turn it into another color, get rid of it. But if you can turn it into another color, then go for your life. It's your choice, right? But what's really fascinating is that when you start to talk about that stuff, that gray stuff, it really starts to get to the nub of what people are really spending their time doing, right? And if you can just open people's minds to the fact that that is not adding any value to me, then you are halfway towards reclaiming such a huge amount of time. But the interesting thing is that sometimes the CEOs will say, so they hear, hang on, you said 20% of our people's time is spent adding no value or not being sure. That's a day a week. And you go, yeah. And they go, what if they're wrong, is what he says. He said, what if they're wrong? And I said, what do you mean? He said, what if it's not gray? And I said, well, it doesn't really matter. He said, what do you mean it doesn't really matter? And I said, well, imagine I give you two tasks to do, one of which you believe is worth doing one of which you believe is not worth doing. Which one are you going to commit to more? And he went, well, the one that I think needs doing. I said, and that's the point. The mere fact that your people believe it's not worth doing means they're not going to commit to it. And that's a key thing, right?
Yeah, it's the perception. It's a perception of that task. I want to talk a little bit about time and well-being, and actually relate it to Diary Detox. So are there some tips that you could give to some people to get started with their own Diary Detox, whether they have the app or they don't? Is there sort of a good way for them to just get their mind set into this methodology?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is about self-awareness. Yeah, it's starting to become conscious of where your time is really going. And the reason I think this is really important is because sometimes when I talk about this, people say, well, I know what I'm doing with my time. Why do I need to do that? And it's like, but do you? Do you really? And I've had somebody go through that journey and go, wow, I had no idea I was doing so much of that. And it's kind of almost like when we don't record things, we kind of fill in the gaps and we go, oh yeah, I think I'm doing probably about this much of this. But then when you actually see it, you go, oh, wow, that's a bit of a surprise. So I think one thing that I would definitely say people do is start to use your diary, right? Start to reflect, start to record everything that you do. And there's some really, really simple ways of doing this, right? I created a YouTube clip, which I'll send you a link to, and you can put it in the show notes.
That would be great. Thank you.
It's a really simple way to insert things and move things in your diary, because some people can find it quite cumbersome. There's a really simple hack you can use to do it that most people don't realize is there. And so I basically say, first of all, just reflect everything that you do. Spend a week and everything you do, just put it in your diary. And then at the end of the week, just look back at it and go, wow, that's interesting. All right. So that's one thing that I say people should do. Another thing that you can do is you can start to use the colors. I mean, if you look at any of my videos, you're going to see all the colors, and I'll explain what all the colors are. Start to put those colors into your calendar, you know, all that stuff that you reflect, put a color in it, and you'll start to see your color go like a kaleidoscope. And the predominant color you see is usually the predominant thing that you are doing. And that can usually bring you some quite interesting insights as well. Those are quite a big deal to do those though, right? It's quite a big shift. I think some really simple things people could do straight away is, I think the first one is plan your blue time in before you do anything else. Yeah, every Friday morning, go into your calendar and think, what do I need to do in an average week for me that allows me to stay in a really good headspace? Breaks, lunch, time with friends, exercise, whatever. And just plan all that stuff in. Just plan it all in. You can move anything in your diary, just don't remove any of that, okay? Because by removing it, you're saying, I don't value my own personal well-being, all right? So just do that to start with, okay? I think another thing that you can do is you can start to accept the true cost of what you put into your diary, all right? And this is going to be a bit of a weird one, but if you think about it, we go to a meeting, right? But when somebody books us for a meeting, we're not really just accepting the meeting. We're accepting the prep time for the meeting. We're accepting the follow-up time for the meeting. We're accepting the travel time to and from the meeting, etc. So what I always say is that, you know, whenever somebody books me for a meeting, I don't just put that hour in. I put that hour, I have half an hour before it, half an hour after it, and the travel time. And you will start to realize that an hour meeting is actually close to 2.5 hours. When you start blocking out 2.5 hours every time you put a meeting in your diary, it really starts you to go, do I really want another meeting in my diary that's going to take 2.5 hours out? And I think that can really get you to start to be a bit more ruthless with your time about, this is valuable. Do I really need to be there? So that's another thing you can do. But I think probably the most important thing you could do is you could just ask yourself the following question when anybody invites you to a meeting. When somebody invites you to a meeting, say, if that meeting were cancelled and never rebooked, what would I lose? And if the answer is, I don't know, or nothing, don't do it. Okay? If it's, I don't know, then ask more questions. If it's nothing, then just don't do it. Don't even go there.
Don't reschedule. If it gets canceled, don't try to make it up.
Yeah, you know, and you know, the classic one is the meeting that says agenda TBC, to be confirmed. It's like, yeah, whatever. You can TBC it all you like. Tell you what, send me the meeting when you've seen it.
So as a founder, I mean, you've said you aim to work about 35 hours max, and you're good with 32, which is amazing.
And I sometimes work more, but then I know what I'm doing when I'm doing that, and that's okay.
Well, I'm just thinking about, there's always something more to do, obviously, as a founder. It's your business, it's your baby, it's you know, you're creating it. On the flip side, how do you stay well when there's all those things that are probably going on your mind of what you need to do or what needs to get done?
I think the key is about being really conscious about what it is I'm trying to achieve. Yeah, I mean, there is always something to be done. I was chatting to a lady who I do some work with sometimes, and she left her long-term career and started her own business. And I remember saying to her one day, why did you start your own business? She said, I want some of what you have, Paul. And I went, what do you think I have that you want? And she said, I want the freedom to decide when I work. And I went, okay, let's be careful here. I said, I do have the choice over when I work, but what I don't have the choice over is when I think about work, because I'll tell you what, that is always in here.
So true. So true. It never switches off. There's
No.
always another idea. I mean, I know I came from a similar story to you, corporate life into creating my own business. And there's definitely a different mindset, but it never switches off. In a good way, it never switches off. Where before it was sort of, it didn't switch off, but it was rumination.
Yeah.
Now it's the ideas.
And I've had to learn that the hard way, right? I'm not going to pretend this has always been perfect. You know, I've had to go on my own journey. It's taught me a lot about my own product when I've gone through those moments. So they're a gift, really. But I think there's two things for me. One of them, which order do I do these in? I suppose the first one would be, probably, I like to start everything with blue, right? Hence why I have the blue band on my wristwatch. I think the first thing is to consciously put stuff into my calendar that is what I call mindful in nature. I'm not one for meditation. I'm not one for yoga or any of that kind of stuff. But I am a big believer that if you just try and sit down and not do anything when you are naturally disposed to doing and thinking about stuff, you will naturally start doing or thinking stuff. So it's almost kind of consciously creating this distraction. And for me, there are three things that I do in my blue time that are what I would call mindful in nature. And what I mean by that is that when I'm doing them, there's no way I could possibly think about work, because the things I'm doing take up all of my attention. One of which is I do triathlon training, so swimming. If you don't think about swimming when you're swimming, you tend to drown. So that's quite a focus. That's a mind focuser. I play the piano. If you don't think about playing the piano when you're playing the piano, it tends to sound quite bad. So that's a really good thing for mindfulness. And I fly a plane. And if you don't think about flying a plane when you're flying a plane, you tend to crash. So these are all things that that's why when I say mindful in nature, that's kind of what I mean. And
yeah, it gets you out of your head and into that activity of exactly what you're doing in the moment. You're present.
Yeah. And it can be really simple, right? It could be reading, reading a novel, exercising, going out for a run. I mean, you just stop thinking about stuff because you're looking into the distance. Oh, that's beautiful. One of those things. So I think consciously planning in mindful related stuff, I think, is a real key one. But the other one is being really, really clear on what it is you want to achieve. And part of one of the other pillars of Diary Detox is about having targets. And sometimes it's about having targets where you can capture your thoughts so that you can park them. Do you remember sometimes people would say, if you can't sleep, take a pad to bed with you so that you can write it down, and then you go, oh, it's there. I've offloaded it, and off I go. In Diary Detox app, you have a place where you put targets, and within each of the targets, you can put down tasks in there. And it's a way of you offloading that, kind of almost in that Harry Potter, taking those thoughts out of your head and dropping it into there. And I think once they're in there, it gives you it's like you're giving yourself permission to not think about it for a little bit. And if you do the weekly detox every week, at the right moment, the app will present you with those thoughts and say, right, which of these are you going to put into your calendar this week? And until that moment, you could just forget about it. And so, yeah, some of it is misdirection. Some of it is tricking my mind. Some of it is just, doing something a little bit more interesting and maybe not consciously thinking about anything.
No, those are amazing. I want to end with just a final question, because I'm super passionate about well-being, and I want to know from you, what does well-being mean to you?
Wow. I think well-being to me means allowing myself to be in the headspace where I can make the right decisions at its simplest form. Yeah, just giving myself space and permission to not have to do anything and actually just do something that I really want to do. You know, I've been in a family relationship when, you know, my relationship with my wife has been great, with my kids has been great, and yet I still wasn't there. And I wasn't there because I wasn't giving myself enough space to be there. And so that's what it is. It's about just looking after myself, loving myself, probably, if anything, and loving myself and those around me enough to want them to have the best of my attention.
Thank you for that.
Welcome.
That was a great, great meaning, great definition of well-being for you. And thank you for your time.
I've never had that question before, so it's quite an interesting one to ponder, hence why I really wanted to give it the space and thoughtful.
No, thank you for that. It was a great answer. I really appreciate your time today. Diary Detox, we'll put in all the links so that people can find you, connect with you. And if you can send us a YouTube video, that would be wonderful. But thank you. Thank you for joining me today.
No, you're more than welcome. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, I always love talking about what I do, and it's nice to share the love.
Until next time, everyone, be here and be well.